I'm Jeff Power, senior writer with RealTime Fantasy Sports. Welcome to the RealTime Fantasy Sports Show. Very excited to be on once again with Logan Glaser of RealTime Fantasy Sports. Logan, thanks again for joining me. Always appreciate talking to you.
Absolutely. Love being on. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, we're going to do under the radar plays for week 4. So Logan and I are going to go over all the games, talk about some under the radar plays for week 4. Should be another exciting week of action. Are we going to get a 70-point game, Logan, like we did last week?
It doesn't look like it, but you never know. I mean, we didn't see that 70-point game coming from the Dolphins, and that was some game.
That was crazy. I'd like to know I should have looked, but the percentage of starts that Devon Achane had. Did you look by chance?
Yeah, I want to say it was like 2 or 3%. It wasn't much. I mean, because prior to that,
Yeah.
he had one carry before that?
Yeah.
He
One
was
carry, one
inactive
catch before
week
that.
1 and then one carry week 2.
Yep.
So yeah, I want to say it was below 5% with his start rate.
I left him on my bench in a couple leagues as well. And I'm
Yeah,
kind of
I got Mostert in a couple, so that definitely helped me with some leagues. So
definitely. He's been tremendous this year. And I'm telling people, I would just hold on to him. I know a lot of people want to sell high on Mostert, but I think he's the lead back. I like Achane a lot, and I think he's talented. But as long as Mostert's healthy, I'm not sure I'm selling high on him, especially with how
yeah,
bad.
I mean, the only concern I would have is if Jeff Wilson eats into their playing time a little bit. I mean, you're going to have 3 talented backs, so I mean, points are going to have to be kind of spread out. But again, I would still keep him. I still think he's the lead back overall.
Definitely. And I wanted to mention, too, if anybody has any questions throughout the broadcast, any start, sit, trade, you name it, Logan and I are happy to answer them. So just put them in the chat. Always a lot of fun to interact with people. And also, we want to talk about this fantasy football face-off game we have here at Real Time Fantasy Sports. It has a different price points to get in. It's just a 3-week tournament, 8 teams, and you pick any players you want for your starting lineup each week. You can only pick them once, though. It's a great game, a great contest that we run here at Real Time Fantasy Sports. And you want to take advantage of our deposit match we have right now going on with Fantasy Alarm. Go to rtsports.com/alarm. First-time depositors get a 100% instant match up to $200. And you can use this for that fantasy face-off game. And Logan's going to show you a starting lineup that he has made for this week as well, just to show you how that works. So that's a lot of fun to see that. So Logan, talk us through who you're starting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so kind of what Jeff was mentioning. So it's a one-time, it's a one and done type of style league. So once you use a player once, you cannot use him again. Contest lasts 3 weeks. So there's a lot of strategy involved with this. So this is a lineup I created for a face-off league I'll be a part of. So you got 2 QB spots. I've got Josh Allen, Justin Herbert. So Herbert has a bye in week 5, so he's not going to be useful. And so I'm going to go ahead and put him on my lineup now. I'm going to be stacking him with Keenan Allen and Stephon Diggs with that QB stack with it. For running backs, I went a little bit lighter compared to some of the top names. So I did not use McCaffrey. I didn't use Pollard. We also have Barkley and Eckler still on the bench as well. So I'm going to be using them in future weeks. So I kind of went with a little bit of a not top heavy, so I can keep those star players for future weeks. So with running backs, I've got Derrick Henry, Raheem Mostert. I'm a little bit concerned when Jeff Wilson comes back, so that's why I kind of want to have Mostert in my lineup now with that. And then Kenneth Walker, who has been phenomenal so far, number 3 overall running back. For wide receivers, I went like I mentioned with the stacks with Keenan Allen, Stephon Diggs, but then I also had the top wide receiver just since I went a little bit less on the running backs to try to get that win this week, and Justin Jefferson with that. And then with Kupp possibly coming back next week, I went Nakua with that. And then to round it out in that flex spot, I went with Zach Moss. Also, again, because Jonathan Taylor is supposed to come back next week. I don't know what his entire situation will be, but I want to make sure I get good points for Moss without taking up a top end running back. And then got some 2 kicker spots and then 2 defenses spot. Went with Folk and Moody at kicker, and then defense with 49ers and Cowboys because I really like those matchups. So that's kind of the overall strategy. I went with in that face-off leagues. There's a lot of strategy to be involved, like I mentioned, just because it is going to be 3 weeks. If you lose, you're out. So you want to make sure you have good stars in your lineup, but you also don't want to go so top-heavy that it leaves you without those star players for future weeks.
I love it, Logan. I think you did a great job, especially talking about those bye weeks. You want to take advantage of the players while you have them. available. So I think it makes a lot of sense. Again, take advantage of our free deposit match going on right now. rtsports.com/alarm. First time deposit match, 100% instant match up to $200. And as always, please play responsibly. Need any help at all, call 1-800-GAMBLER. So take advantage of that fantasy football face-off this week. It's a great, great, great contest. All right, Logan, let's get into these games. I was talking about it before we came on. I'm really kind of intrigued by the game tonight. If you're watching this live, it's Detroit at Green Bay, and it should be a great contest. So let's look at the line for that one, Logan. It is 45 for the over/under, and Green Bay is favored. Uh, Actually, Green Bay plus 2.5. So that is the line there. And who's your under the radar play for this matchup as well?
Yeah, so the guy I'm gonna be looking at in this matchup is Romeo Dobbs. I know Christian Watson is returning, but Dobbs has been looked great in their last couple of weeks with that. He has 3 touchdowns so far in the season. Great matchup this week against Detroit. I think it could be potentially a high-scoring game, as most of the games are with them. 12 targets last week, so he's definitely a guy I think I'm gonna be starting in my lineups if I had that opportunity.
I'm the same way. I like a Packer as well. I think the Packers are going to win this game at home. And I'm going to say over for that over under. 45 is not a huge number. So I think it'll be a high scoring game, like you mentioned. I like Jordan Love. Surprisingly, he's 5th overall in fantasy quarterback scoring right now. I think he's looked great to start his career. He has multiple touchdowns all 3 games, 21 plus fantasy points each of his 3 games as well. Like you mentioned, Christian Watson's likely back this week, Aaron Jones too. So I think that's a real plus for him as well. I think he can top 20 fantasy points again this week against the Lions. They're 19th against the pass, middle of the pack in terms of fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks as well. So that should be a good matchup for a lot of offensive players, in my opinion, tonight. All right, the next game, Atlanta at Jacksonville. If I'm not mistaken, that is the London game, and that is,
Yep.
I guess Jacksonville is considered the home team. It's 43.5 for the line, -3 for Jacksonville. What's
Yeah,
your
I
thoughts?
think this is probably one of my favorite bets of the week. I'm going to be on Jacksonville -3. I think they're just a far more offensive team than Atlanta, and they have the capability. They've got several different playmakers that can put up a lot of points. So I'll be going with them, and I trust Trevor Lawrence a lot more than Desmond Ritter.
What's
Um,
your play for this one?
yeah, so my pick, I'm going to consider him an under the radar player because he's kind of overrated a little bit so far for the season. But I'm going to be going with Kyle Pitts. I think he's now almost considered to be a fringe starter in leagues. Just because I mean we're already 3 weeks in, he hasn't had any top or points above 10. But Jacksonville really struggles against that tight end position. They rank 29th in that tight end position. So I think this is finally going to be his game that he gets in the double digits at that position.
I have a tight end as well as my under the radar player. It's not Kyle Pitts, but I agree with you. I think Jacksonville wins this game. It worries me a little bit with the way they're playing, though. They have not looked good to start the season. I don't know what's going on with Trevor Lawrence, but hopefully he gets it going. Maybe going overseas will be a good thing for him. But like you said too, I don't like the Falcons offense very much with Desmond Ritter as the QB. I don't know if he's the guy, so it worries me. And I'm going to say under for the line here. I think it's the Falcons are not going to score much in this matchup. And like I teased, my guy is a tight end, but it's with Jacksonville. It's Evan Ingram. I don't know if he's really under the radar because he's had a pretty good season, but still, I don't think he's considered a marquee fantasy tight end. I like him though. He has 11 plus fantasy points each of his last 2 games. He's been targeted 8 times in those 2 games as well. Jaguars throw the ball a lot. Zay Jones still out of the lineup, and Ingram's 4th overall in fantasy tight end scoring right now. Kind of surprising too. Kind of like
Wow.
Jordan Love being a top 5 guy, and I think Ingram's about a must start this week against the Falcons. They allow the 5th most fantasy points at tight ends as well. So I like that Jacksonville offense as well in this matchup. All right, Logan. First afternoon game, I guess midday game, I should say, is Miami at Buffalo. Miami put up a ton of points last week. This should be a tremendous game, in my opinion. 54 for the over-under, so a huge number. And Buffalo's favored -2.5. Do you think the Dolphins keep it rolling? Do you think it goes over that huge over-under mark?
Yeah, I think I might be riding with the Dolphins this week. I think I wouldn't have said that at the beginning of the season, but they've looked so good so far, and I think Buffalo hasn't looked great. They looked good last week against Washington, but the first couple of games they looked just okay. But I think Miami's rolling that offense. They got great team chemistry, as we've seen some background clips with that. But the guy I'm going to be looking at for my under the radar player is going to be Gabriel Davis. He scored touchdowns in the last 2 games. He is actually a pretty touchdown dependent guy, and this is going to be a game with a lot of touchdowns in it. Last year he had 7 touchdowns with that already too this year. But yeah, as you mentioned, the over under is 54 in this game, so lots of points are going to be scored. So I feel perfectly fine putting Gabriel Davis in my starting lineup if he's kind of on your between the flex and bench spot.
What do you think? Is it going to go over or under that mark? That's a big
I
number.
think I'm going to go with the over just because of these two offenses. I think we saw last week another game that was 54 was the Chargers and Minnesota Vikings. I think that was the highest over under last week. It came down to that final play. Cousins couldn't get it done, and that's why it went under. But it was definitely still a high scoring game.
Yeah, I think I'm going over too. I think it's going to be a high scoring game. And I'm not like you, though. I think Buffalo's going to win this game at home. It's going to be a close game, though. It should be a great game, like I mentioned. And same way of thinking as you. I think there's going to be a lot of points, a lot of touchdowns. So I'm going with a touchdown dependent player as my under the radar play as well. And that's Latavius Murray. He's emerged as the short yardage back, a goal line back, whatever you want to call it, in the Bills' explosive offense. He gets that work around the goal line. High scoring game, like I mentioned. He has touchdowns 2 straight games. I think he's going to score again. So it's a little bit of a risky play, but I'm looking for Murray to find the end zone again this week. All right, next game, Denver at Chicago. I mean, this 2 teams that have been just a disaster this year. I was not seeing this. They're both 0-3, 46 for the over-under, plus 3.5 for the Chicago Bears in this one. It's just not a fun game to watch, in my opinion. But what's your thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. This is definitely going to be one of those games where both teams come in struggling. Maybe it gets one of the teams rolling a bit. Denver's looked a lot better on offense than Chicago has. Russell Wilson has actually been putting up an okay amount of points. It's just their defense that has really struggled so far. But the guy I'm going to be looking at is Cortland Sutton, who actually has been a pretty good standout so far for Denver. He's been kind of flying a little bit under the radar just because he should be the number 2 with that offense behind Judy, but he's looked great so far. He did struggle last week with 2 fumbles, but he had, for fantasy, he put up a great amount of points in all throughout the season so far. So he's definitely going to be a guy that I feel comfortable with starting in my lineup. And I do think Denver covers the line with this.
All right. I say Denver wins too on the road here and covers. For the over-under, I'm actually say the under there, though. While Denver's offense is good, Chicago has not looked good offensively, so I'll say under there. And I kind of like Rashawn Johnson with Chicago this week. Played a season high 45% of the snaps last week. Team struggling. They need to almost look towards the future at this point, see what they got. And I think Johnson's their future running back starter. So I think they're going to start giving him more play. Why not this week against Denver, we saw what happened last week when they tried to stop the run against Miami. It was awful. They're dead last against the run. Most fantasy points are running backs allowed as well. So I'm considering Johnson the flex spot this week if I have him, and I'm looking at players to plug in
Yeah,
there.
his attempts have been slowly going up so far, and he's looked good so far.
All right, we got a question over here, Logan. Half PPR 12-man league. Should I trade Hollywood, Puka, Monty for Gibbs? That's a lot to give up for Gibbs. What's your
Yeah, I
thoughts?
kind of think the same way. Gibbs hasn't been overwhelmingly amazing so far. Puka's been probably the top 5 wide receivers so far. I know Cup's coming back, but Hollywood Brown has put up 17 plus fantasy points in the last 2 weeks, and also Monty's a good solid option to have off of your bench as well.
Yeah, I think I'm staying put on that. I think that's too much to give up for Gibbs. I like Gibbs. I think he has some potential, but I don't know if he's going to be the fantasy star that everybody thought he might be. And like you mentioned, Hollywood and Puka have both been really good. Brown's been surprising because Dobbs has been good. So I think I'm staying put with that roster. I'm not gonna trade that much for Gibbs,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
and especially with bye weeks coming up, starting next week with that,
It's true.
you're gonna a lot of depth is gonna be involved in. So
All
I
right,
would keep
let's
it
move on to the next game. Baltimore at Cleveland. Baltimore's 2-1. Cleveland's 2-1. Should be a good game. Division rival here. 40.5 for the over/under, so low score. And Browns are favored -3 in this one.
Yeah, I think it could be a sneaky over on this. I think it could there definitely has potential to go on the over with this. When you get both of these offenses with it, they can definitely have the capability to move the ball. It's unlike that Denver Chicago game where it's kind of we're looking kind of more towards under with that, just because two offenses can kind of struggle. But these offenses can move the ball. I know Nick Chubb is out, and you also have Dobbins that are out, but you got two decent quarterbacks with that. And for my player, I'm going to be looking at is going to be Elijah Moore. He's kind of been, yeah, like we mentioned, under the radar so far. He hasn't had any games above 50 yards yet this season, but last week he had 9 targets and 9 receptions. He's great in PPR formats with that. So if you do have a PPR league, I would feel fine starting Elijah Moore this week.
I agree with you. I think it's going to be the over here. I think Cleveland wins the game as well. And I have another Cleveland receiver, and kind of like Moore, he has done very little, but he has been on the field a ton. So I think it's just a matter of time before he breaks out. And that's Donovan Peoples Jones. He's played at least 87% of the snaps all 3 games, leads all Browns receivers in playing time, had his best game of the season last week, 3 catches for 49 yards. He has 4 targets each of his last 2 games as well. So I think it's just a matter of time before he has a big game. Why not this week against the Baltimore Ravens, their division rival? All right,
For
next
sure.
game, Cincinnati at Tennessee. Tennessee got blown out last week. Cincinnati 1-2, finally got a win. 40 and a half, low scoring over under for this one as well. Exact same as the Baltimore Cleveland one. And it's Tennessee plus 2.5. What's your thoughts here?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go with Cincinnati. I think they're rolling a little bit. They had a great fourth quarter in that. I do like the over again. I feel like it's hard not to go with the over with Cincinnati's offense. I know they have struggled mightily the first 2 games, but they looked a lot better in that third game against the Rams. Joe Burrow finally started clicking with that. So I think I'm gonna go with the Bengals and the over on that matchup. For a guy that I'm kind of going to be targeting, it would be Treylon Burks. I think he's been more involved in that pass game with Tennessee, and I expect that kind of continue. I do think with facing Cincinnati's defense, they're a little bit weaker and involved in more high-scoring games, so that definitely gives him the capability of going over.
And Hopkins is banged up as well, so that's
For
another
sure.
place.
I mean, yeah, that's definitely a huge factor as well, giving
Yeah,
him
I
more
like
targets.
I like Cincinnati to win and cover, and I'll go with the over too. That's really low, and I'm kind of intrigued by Tyler Boyd this week with Cincinnati. He's still on the field a ton, played at least 77% of the snaps all 3 games. He has 11 catches on 17 targets his last 2 games. He's getting more looks in this offense. T. Higgins has kind of disappeared at times, so I think this is a good matchup for him again against a Tennessee secondary that hasn't been very good this year. So I think Tyler Boyd could be a good number 3 fantasy receiver for you this week. All right, next game, Los Angeles Rams at the Indianapolis Colts. That game right now sits at the over under is, how come I don't see it? It is 45 and a half for the over under, and Indianapolis is favored -1 is their line. They're 2-1, Rams 1-2. Give me your thoughts here.
Yeah, Colts have honestly looked pretty good. I think
Yeah,
coming into the season, I wasn't sold on them, but they have looked good. I mean, as you mentioned, they're 2-1, and this is all being done without Jonathan Taylor. And Richardson's been hurt for more than half the season, it feels like. Injuries in the last game and the game before, right
yep.
before the goal line with that. So, yeah, I think I like the Colts in this matchup. I think they've done really good on the offensive line with that. I think a lot will come down to if Anthony Richardson does play. I think it's pointing towards him playing, is the last I have heard.
Yep.
But the guy that's under my radar would probably prefer if Minshew was playing. It's going to be wide receiver Josh Downs for the Colts. Last week he had 8 receptions, 57 yards with Minshew at quarterback. I think the wide receiver just have more upside if Minshew's in compared if Richardson is. The ball might move better with Richardson, but he's going to be getting all those rushing touchdowns and yards, so it's less great for the wide receivers.
I agree. I like Downs as well. He got a lot of targets last week. I think the Colts win this one at home as well. It just surprised me also, and I'll say under for this number. I don't think it'll be a super high scoring game. One guy I'm kind of intrigued by with the Rams is Tutu Atwell. He's really emerged as a top deep threat for the Rams passing game. he is just explosive, super fast. He scored his first touchdown of the season last week. He has at least 15 fantasy points all 3 games. He has 70+ total yards all 3 games as well, and at least 8 targets. So his start's not a fluke. He's getting consistent work. The Colts, they're 23rd overall against the pass as well. So I think Atwell's a good play in this matchup. And I almost wonder if he's going to end up being more valuable than Puka before it's all said and done, because I think,
Yeah, he should have. I think he should have had 2 touchdowns last week. I thought he was in on the first initial run
yep,
that he rushed, but apparently not. I thought his heel was not down, but got reversed.
yeah, I seriously think he may end up being the better, have better fantasy numbers in the end, because I think when Cup returns, if he ever returns, he's going to take that Nakua role, and Atwell's going to continue to be used the same. All right,
Yeah.
next game, Tampa Bay at New Orleans, another division rival game here. And the over-under for this one sits at 39.5, -3.5 for the Saints. So really low-scoring game. I think this is the lowest one on the slate. Yes, it is. So what's your thoughts here?
Yeah, these are 2 teams that don't really like each other. There's been a lot of fights going back and forth between these 2 teams for the last couple of years. I think I will be going with Tampa Bay to cover with that, just because Carr is a little banged up. I think I saw that he's not going to be playing this week.
Yeah, probably
James
not going
Winston.
to play.
Yeah, so we got Winston at quarterback, and he's a very turnover heavy with that. He does like to throw the ball around. Kamara is back as well for the Saints, so that does help them. But again, I would Baker's looked okay so far with the Tampa Bay offense. They've moved the ball well. Mike Evans has been looking phenomenal. A guy I will be putting on my under the radar, though, is going to be for the Saints, and that is Michael Thomas. I think with Winston throwing the ball, we saw some massive numbers. He also is going against his former team with that. So he's going to put up tons of yards, but he's also going to have tons of turnovers. So it's good for their offensive and for fantasy purposes, but I don't think it's great for the team with that. So Michael Thomas has been pretty consistent so far. All 3 games have been between 11 and 12 points, and I think he finally gets over that 12-point mark with Winston throwing the ball in.
I say the Saints win this game at home, even if Winston's starting. I'll go the over there. That's a really low number, like you said. It's kind of scary to even, bet on that, because there's a lot of uncertainty with both these offenses, in my opinion. But I'll go the over there. And I like a different Saints receiver in this one. That's Rashid Shaheed. So I think with Winston there, like you said, he likes to push the ball downfield, take more chances. That's Shaheed's game. He's a top deep threat on the team. So I like him in this matchup. He played at season high 72% of the snaps last week as well. So I think Shaheed could be a good play for fantasy teams in week 4. All right, next game, Washington at Philadelphia. 43.5 for the over-under. Eagles 3-0, Commanders 2-1, -8.5 for the Eagles. What's your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think Washington covers that. I still think Philadelphia does win that, but I think 8.5 is a little much. I think Washington, they had tons of hype surrounding them for the first 2 games, and then the Buffalo just completely blew the door open last week. They had opportunities to stay within that game. They just kind of convert a couple turnovers by Sam Howell with that. But another guy that has been getting so much hype for Washington is Jahan Dotson during the preseason, and he is just disappeared so far in the regular season. He's got no games above 10 fantasy points. I think this is finally the first week that he hits that. I think he's just too talented of a wide receiver, and it's due for him to hit. So he's going to be my under the radar player for them.
Yeah, I think that line's low, 43.5. So I'll go over there. I think the Eagles cover, though. I think they're kind of catching up to the Commanders now around the league. You get to see them a few times, get some game film. So I like the Eagles to win and win big at home. And because of that, I kind of like Antonio Gibson this week. I think it's a game script game where he gets more playing time. He actually played more last week, 61% of the snaps compared to 37% for Brian Robinson. So he has 3 receptions each of his last 2 games, too. So I think Gibson could get the catches in garbage time as they're playing from behind. So I think it could lead to his best fantasy game of the season. All right, Minnesota at Carolina. Our next game on here, and that one is the high-powered Minnesota offense going up against Carolina. And the over-under on that one sits at, I can't find it right now, though, Logan. There it is, 46.5 and +4.5 for Carolina. 0-3, both these teams, kind of a surprise. Give me your play
Yeah, I
here.
think this is a kind of a must-win game for both teams if they do want to have a potential for pushing for the playoffs. I think Minnesota is the better team. I think they're in desperate need of a win. I said last week, whoever loses between Minnesota and Chargers, I'm picking them to win this week. So I would be going with Minnesota in this matchup. I do think they're the more talented team, and they're in desperation mode of getting a win. So I always like that early on in the season, picking them and betting on those teams with that. Guy I'm going to be selecting, though, for under the radar. He has been very over the radar so far this year, and it's going to be Adam Thielen. He's going to be facing his former team in the Vikings this week, so going up against some friends with that. But he's been the number one target so far in Carolina, and he is absolutely produced, whether it be Bryce Young at quarterback or Andy Dalton with that. He has 51 fantasy points in the last 2 weeks, and he's a must start in leagues for right now.
You like these revenge game narratives, don't you, Logan?
I do. I
All
do.
right.
I mean, the players are always going to be more hype, and their teammates are going to try to get them the ball more. So
Definitely. I like DJ Shark actually in this one, a different Panthers receiver. He actually led the Panthers receivers in snaps last week, despite Thielen having better production. He was still out there a ton, 94% of the snaps. He was hurt early in the year. He's healthy, playing a lot. Vikings have allowed some big games to receivers this year. Just look at Keenan Allen last week. So I like Shark in this matchup. All right, Logan, we're a little bit up against the clock, so we're going to try to roll through a few more of these games quicker. Let's just give me your player for the game now when I mention it. So Pittsburgh at Houston. Who's your under the radar player for this one?
I think this is going to be a pretty tight matchup with that. My player I'm going to go with, he probably was started in your lineups last week, was Nico Collins. We talked about him a lot preseason with that, how he's going to be the number one wide receiver option in Houston. They do have several targets now, and that's kind of exploded with Tank Dell and Robert Woods, but I still feel comfortable starting Nico Collins with that.
I like Calvin Austin. So Allen Robinson's banged up. Austin had his first touchdown of the season last week. I think it could lead to a bigger role for him this week with Robinson banged up. He has 2 games with 9 or more fantasy points as well. So I think Austin could be a good under the radar play. All right, Las Vegas at Los Angeles in this one. So the Los Angeles Chargers, I should say. So who's your under the radar play here?
Yeah, so he's probably the most popular player for to be picked up, and that's Joshua Palmer. I think he's going to slide into that number 2 wide receiver role, and with how Chargers move the ball, a lot will depend on Eckler if he's back. But if he's not back, they're going to be throwing the ball 40 plus times. So I'm all in on Palmer being their number 2 option.
I like Jacoby Myers. So he returned from his concussion last week, had a big game similar to week 1. He was targeted 12 times, caught 7 passes for 85 yards. He has 15 plus fantasy points each of his 2 games. So I don't think he's going to be under the radar too much longer. He's going to be a pretty significant fantasy player from here on out, in my opinion. He's getting a lot of targets. The Chargers also allow the most fantasy points to receivers, 32nd overall against the pass. All right, I'm trying to look. Oh, let's do one more game. See what the best one is left. There are actually not many good ones left. Let's do Kansas City at the New York Jets, just because I think you could have some different guys you would consider playing in this matchup. So no Taylor Swift. You can't pick her. But who are you picking, Logan?
Yeah, so for this one, I think I'm going to go with Dalvin Cook. I think he's looked okay out of the backfield with that. I think a guy that might be even questionable to start in lineups moving forward is Garrett Wilson. I think when you compare like Garrett Wilson to a guy like Adam Thielen, I would much rather have Adam Thielen in my lineup this week. I think just based off of the game script, I think the Jets are just really struggling with their spot. So I would think I would go other options than Wilson, but I do like Dalvin Cook as a running back for this week.
Yeah, who would have ever thought that? But you're right. Wilson is scary right now. I actually kind of like Sky Moore with the Chiefs. He's becoming more consistent. 10 targets his last 2 games. He's caught 7 of those. He has 8 plus fantasy points each of those last 2 games as well. Second most playing time of any Chiefs receiver also. So that's who I like in this matchup. Logan, didn't get through all the games, got through most of them. Just a few were missing. We have one question here before we get out of here, though. Trade Connor for Metcalf and Henry plus Mitchell equals Pacheco. What's he trying to say here?
Connor's been good so far this year. I think the wide receiver room in Seattle is a little bit crowded, but Metcalf has done well as well. But Connor's looked great so far.
So if he has Connor, he's getting Metcalf. That's what it looks like.
Yes.
Receiver
I think I would stay on Connor, but
you would stay on Connor.
I think both both players are of equal value. Again, I see the wide receiver room and running back. It
I mean,
seems
his
like
big
wide
issue
receiver.
is that Kupp's out and then Kirk's kinda underperformed. Yeah, I think I sit tight. I don't think I wanna get rid of Connor. I just that running back depth is so important, so I'm gonna stick with him. I don't think I'm making that trade. You good with that?
Yeah, I think I'm
Alright.
fine with that. I'm fine keeping him.
Alright. Well, thanks to everybody for, watching out there. Appreciate it. Good luck in all your games week 4, and thanks to you, Logan, for helping me out once again, get through all
Thanks for
these
having me
games.
on.
Appreciate it. Alright, this has been Jeff Paur with Real Time Fantasy Sports. Good luck in all your week 4 games, everybody.